Jungle. Ah!
Hey everyone, this is Dave here at Blueberries Games, and I'm actually doing another episode of Blues Budget Brews, the Commander set stuff. It's been a little while since I've done one of these videos. I'm actually going to be doing the last in the first part, or actually the last one of the first series of the Commanders that I built for this series. Any future ones will be ones that I have made after the initial offering. I just forgot to do this video and I moved on to the budget battle brews because the interest in them was so high that I kind of got stuck in it. But we're going to finish that series out with Torbran, Thane of Red Fell. It is a dwarf noble legendary creature. It is 3 red and 1 to cast. It's a 2/4 and it says if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. It is a mono red deck, so this one's going to be pretty quick and pretty simple, and then at the end I'll show you, or I'll tell you some of the upgrades that you can do for this deck. Please remember, this deck, like all the other Commander budget decks that I have made a video for and put up on the Facebook page, are also for sale. The Commander decks are $40 a piece, but if you buy more than one, they are $35. I've only got a couple of the original ones left, and then I will start doing these again with the second set of the Commanders that I have. Now, since some of these have sold, I have made newer versions of them, so if you want a deck that may have sold, just remember that I can possibly, for most of them, there are some that I can't, but some of them I can remake a similar version. It won't be an exact duplicate, but it'll be pretty close. I think I'm actually working on Ariel right now as a second version of it. It's, again, very similar to the original version, so if you're interested in that, let me know and we'll go from there. However, let's get going on Torbran, Thane of Red Fell. So as I do with every single one of my videos, I start with the lands with the Commander. So we're going to go, it's a monocolored deck. So with red, it's not really a lot of options given for the budget version. And as far as the upgrades, there are some, but they're quite expensive. So we'll go over it and then I'll tell you what they are. So I start with Forgotten Cave because it's cycling. And the Desert of the Fervent also for cycling, and Ash Barrens again for cycling because there's not a lot of options in the mono red section for budget cards. Memorial to War is another one. It actually sacrifices to destroy a land. Land destruction in Commander is important to battle opponent lands that are, oppressive and can really hurt you. Like, for instance, a Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale can really hurt some decks, so you just want to be able to take care of that problem. Evolving Wilds because it's going to go and thin out your deck, and Terramorphic Expanse again. Myriad Landscapes, so you can go ahead and search for 2 lands. They're basics. It says that share a land type, you're only got 1 in here. It's all mountains. And then Blighted Gorge. You can sacrifice it, deal 2 damage to our creature or player. It does not play. I want to make this very clear. Torbran says red instant, or if it's dealt from a red source, altogether a red source. Some cards in here will not be red. They will be colorless. They do not benefit from Torbran, but they help aid Torbran because they'll do stuff that you want. And then the rest is mountains, and I believe it's like 28 or something like that mountains. But remember, I'll have the deck list linked in the description section of this video, along with a link to where you can purchase it if you'd like to. So those are the lands, and again, I will go over a upgrade version of them after I'm done going over the deck. Some small ramp will go in here. I put a little bit in here. I go with Red Engaged Map because it goes and gets a land, thins it out, so you don't draw land later. You can get a land in your hand. There's no mana fixing needed here because all your lands are going to tap for red. Same thing with Traveler's Amulet, just to thin out the deck. Darksteel Ingot so that you can at least have a mana rock or 2. It's indestructible, so it can't really be, most people don't exile artifacts often, especially a Darksteel Ingot, so at least you'll have a mana source if somebody's playing Mass Land Destruction. A Cryptolith Fragment, one of those things again where Torbran doesn't benefit it, but it will help aid Torbran in what you're trying to accomplish. It enters tapped, it adds for color of any mana of any color, and then it deals or makes each player lose a life. That's important because you're trying to whittle down everybody's life totals, hopefully all at once. So, and then it flips, and when it flips into a flying, death-touching 1/4 Eldrazi Reflection, and when it attacks, each opponent loses 3 life. So, that's what it's in there for. Seer's Lantern is in here. It's a mana rock that adds a colorless, so it helps aid you a little bit if you're trying to get ahead. But it also taps for 2, and tap it to scry for 1, so you can kind of make your deck more top deckable as you're going. And the last thing in here for the ramp section is Magnifying Glass. Another rock it adds to add a colorless, or you can pay 4 and tap it to investigate. And to investigate, you put a colorless artifact token onto the battlefield that has, you pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, and you draw a card. Red doesn't have a lot of reliable, good card draw, so this is one of the ways that I was able to get that in there. Alright. Next section is the creature section. This isn't a very heavy section. This deck is more of a spell slinger style deck. And the creatures are just here to help aid that along. Excuse me. Alright. We start with Spear Sower. Or Spewer, sorry. Spewer. It's hard to say that. One to cast for an 0/2 with Defender. So if you have a 1/1 coming down on you and you can get this out early, at least it can block a little bit. And then it deals 1 damage to each player. With Torbran, whenever you deal damage to an opponent, and this is where it gets kind of important. For each time it does damage to something, it doesn't matter that this is one source, it actually adds the +2 damage to each source that it does it to because it's a different instance. So if there are 4 players like a pod, and you deal 1 damage to each player, each opponent now takes 3. So keep that in mind, and a lot of cards here are going to benefit from that. Blister Spit Gremlin, it's just a 1 to cast 1/1, and it deals a damage to each opponent. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and there are a lot of them in here, you can untap it so you can do it again. Same thing with Electrostatic Field, it does a damage to each opponent whenever you cast an instant or sorcery. And again, this deck is mostly spell slinging, instant, and sorceries. Firebrand Archer, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals a damage to each opponent, and that's important because while there are some creatures in here, there are also some non-instant and sorceries that can benefit with the Firebrand Archer. Thermal Alchemist, you can tap it to deal damage to each opponent. So again, when you use it and Torbran is in play, it's 3 damage to each opponent. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can untap it. So there's a common theme here with all these. Harsh Mentor, whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, a creature, or a land on the battlefield, if it's not a mana ability, Harsh Mentor deals 2 damage to that player. It's a red source, so if Torbran's out, it's 4 damage. Gutter Snipe, pretty simple. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. You see the theme here. Glint Horn Buccaneer, and there's a small little set of cards in here that'll benefit this guy. 3 to cast, 2/4, and I'm actually making a red-blue pirate deck that for the second, versions of these decks that I'm making. For the second series, I guess. This is version 1 series, and then my next series of decks has a pirate one, and actually I don't have one of these that I need for it, but it benefits this deck more. So it's a 3 to cast 2/4 with haste. Whenever you discard a card, Glinthorn Buccaneer deals a damage to each opponent, and then you can pay mana to discard a card and draw a card and activate it only if Glinthorn Buccaneer is attacking. We have other ways to go ahead and discard cards in this deck, so it benefits here. And remember that 1 damage turns into 3 with Torbran in play. This card is actually called Fanatic of Mogus. It is a 4 to cast 4/2 Minotaur that says when it enters the battlefield or enters play, you deal damage to each opponent equal to your devotion to red. So each one of these creatures in play, plus other things that I have in here that are in play, deals damage to each opponent equal to your pips, is what they're called, or your mana symbols in play that are red. And then with Torbran in play, you add 2 to that. Spitfire Legak, 3/4 with landfall. Whenever a land enters battlefield under your control, deal damage to each opponent. Again, you can see the theme here. Tectonic Giant, 4 to cast 3/4. Whenever it attacks or becomes a target of a spell an opponent controls, you can choose to deal 3 damage to each opponent, which is probably what you're going to pick. Or exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them, and until your next turn, you may play that card. Some situations will call for that. Most likely, you're just going to deal 3 damage to each opponent. Sir Sir Kara, the Bold, 5 to cast for a 3/3. Whenever the Sir Kara, the Bold, or an instant or sorcerer spell you control deals damage to a player, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. You still have to pay the casting cost of that card. And then it taps to do damage to any target. So, Fire Servant, obviously this is going to be a secondary theme here. If a red instant or sorcery spell you control would deal damage, it deals double that damage instead. So, realize you can add, so the way you can stack damage is, say for instance you were to do tap Sir Kara for 1 and deal 1 damage to an opponent. You can then stack it so that Torbran's ability hits that and it makes it 3 damage, and then it gets doubled instead of making it a 1 damage doubled and then add 3 or 2. Sorry, so that would be it would be 5 versus 4 if you do it the correct way. Remember, stacking is important when it comes to the way you do all of your triggers. And then last creature is Chandra's Incinerator. It's a 6/6. It costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of damage dealt to an opponent this turn, which in this deck will be a lot. It's a 6/6 Trampler, and then whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. It helps to clear the board of threats that are coming at you that you can't deal with otherwise. So that's the creature section. Now for the biggest section here is going to be the instants and sorceries. I'm going to go as fast as I can with this section. Bear with me. Alright, so Shock. Pretty simple, deals 2 damage, it's an instant. This is where it gets cool. Electricity, and a lot of the spells that are in this deck do similar effects to this. So not the overload, but the actual overload part of it. So it deals a damage to a creature you don't control, and if you overload it, it deals 1 damage to each creature you don't control. Remember what I said earlier, Torbran, for each instance of damage that a red source deals, it adds 2 damage. So for each creature, it deals 1 and then an additional 2 because of Torbran. Keep that in mind for a lot of the cards coming up. Like Blazing Volley, deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, and with Torbran it deals 3. Chandra's Pyrohelix. This is cool because it splits. So, you deal 2 damage divided any way you choose among 1 or 2 target players. Each damage is split. It doesn't matter if it's doing it to the same target or not, because you can choose to split it. 1 damage here and then 1 damage again to it, making it so it's 1 damage plus 2 and 1 damage plus 2. It can make it 6 damage. And all these cards that I have in here that do this are like that. Keep that in mind. Same thing with Twin Bolt. It deals 2 damage divided any way you choose among any number of between 2 target creatures and or players. Again, if you split it, 1 damage to a player, and then choose 1 more damage to a player, it's separate instances of damage. And I know this because I played with this card, or a version of one of these cards. I think it's Chandra's Pyrohelix on Arena, and that's how the arena or the rules of the game work. Because this says it's split, it's 2 different instances, and that's where Torbran shines. Royal Eruption, it deals 3 damage to any target, and if the spell is kicked, it deals 5 instead. Kicker's high, but at least it's extra damage. Flame Rift deals 4 damage to each player, that includes you, but because with Torbran out, it deals extra damage to your opponents, you're willing to risk that. Incinerate deals 3 damage to something, and if it dies, you exile it. Or no, I'm sorry. That's another one. This one, it can't be regenerated this turn. Okay, whatever. Lightning Strike deals, again, 3 damage to anything. Reality Hammer deals 2 damage to anything for 2. Thunderbolt, you can choose now, and you only get to choose 1. You can deal 3 damage to a player, or 4 damage to a creature with flying, so it helps you. You don't have a lot of flying defense in this deck, so that helps you a little bit. Pyroclasm, and a lot of the cards that are going to follow are going to be an effect like this. Deals 2 damage to each creature. Again, with Torbran out, deals 4 damage. Cinderclasm, same thing. It deals 1 damage, or if you kick it, it deals 2 damage to each creature. Underworld Fires deals 1 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, which is important. And if that permanent would die if it was dealt damage this way, it's exiled. Whip Flare deals 2 damage to each non-artifact creature. Urza's Rage, way back in the day when we were, I was playing with my big play group, which I just reconnected with recently. This used to be a finisher. It still can be a finisher in a deck like this. So it deals 3 damage, and then if you kick it, it can't, or I'm sorry, it can't be countered, but if it deals 3 damage, and if you kick it, it deals 10 damage, and damage can't be prevented. Touch of the Void, it's actually, one of the problems I have with this is I didn't have a whole lot of other things to put in here that would fit the budget. So Touch of the Void does not benefit from Torbran. It deals 3 damage, and if the creature dies this way, you can exile it. It does not benefit because it has the Void. It is not a red source. Skewer the Critics deals 3 damage to any target, and you can pay 1 as a spectacle if an opponent lost life this turn. In this deck, you're most likely going to have that. Sizzle deals 3 damage to each opponent. With Torbran, it's 5. That's a quarter of everybody's, not a quarter, an eighth of everybody's life. Arc Lightning, again, it splits, so you deal 3 damage divided any way you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. And that means that it can actually deal this. For 3 mana, it can deal a total of 9 damage. So keep that in mind. Same with Flames of the Firebrand. Again, it's one of those cards that splits off 3 damage divided any way you choose and can deal 9 damage total. Open Fire deals 3 damage. Brimstone Volley deals 3 damage, but if it deals 5 damage instead if a creature died this turn. Annihilating Fire, 3 damage to something, and if something dies that was dealt damage by this, you exile it. It's very helpful on that one. There are some reasons why that's more helpful than others. There are some things that are just a pain in the ass that you need to exile instead of just kill. Shake the Foundations deals 1 damage to each creature without flying, and then you get to draw a card. Again, card draw is light and red. Flame Sweep deals 2 damage to each creature, except for creatures you control with flying, which we don't have any in this deck. I'm sure you could do something with that, but that's not the point of the card. Sweltering Suns deals 3 damage to each creature, and if for some reason you don't need to use it, you can cycle it away. Rolling Temblor deals 2 damage to each creature with flying. I'm sorry, without flying. So again, it deals 2 damage to basically anything without flying, but you can flash it back. In case you have somebody who's doing token swarm decks, this deck just annihilates it. Chandra's Outrage splits, so it deals 4 damage to target creature and 2 damage to that creature's controller. So because the damage is split, it actually deals 6 damage to a creature and then 4 damage to that creature's controller. Alright, and then we're going to go into the X spells. So I only included a couple X spells because that's where this deck really wants to be, is in the X spell. Monetarily speaking, I had to go on the budget and the availability of some of the X spells. Like, I mean, I'm sure that there are a couple in here. I can't remember. It's been a while since I built this deck, and I had to go over it real quickly. But I believe Fireball's in here. But, you know, Fireball effects is what we're going for. So, Street Spasm. It's a 1 red and X, and it deals X damage to a creature without flying that you don't control. And then you can overload it for 2 red, and then double X. So it means that for every 2 you put into it, it's 1. And then it deals that damage to each creature without flying you don't control. Conflagrate is 1 red double X. So again, for every 2 you put into X, it equals 1 damage. And it deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of targets. Has flashback, but the important part is that for every 2 you pay, so for every damage you do with Torbran out with this, because it splits, it's actually 3 damage. So you're paying 2 for 3 damage. You can flash it back. I mean, you could. I don't know how often you're going to discard X cards to flash it back, but it works. And there's the Fireball. You can do a whole bunch of different effects with Fireballs. I believe there are a couple of newer versions that would be more beneficial than Fireball. But I mean, it's an oldie and it's a goodie. And I mean, there are websites and companies named after it because of, you know, like Channel Fireball. And then Rolling Thunder, 2 red and X, and again, this one splits, so you deal X damage divided any way you choose among any number of target creatures or players, and when you split it, each instance of a damage gets hit with Torbran's ability, so it's 3 damage per X you pay into that. So, those are the instants and sorceries for Torbran that I've chosen for the budget version. I'm going to do a section here that is sorely needed for red. It's the card draw section. It gets its own section just because you gotta put them in here because you're gonna want to discard lands to draw other cards because you need to get all those spells into your hand. You do not want lands. So I did it with as many as I had at the time. So Faithless Looting, discard a card, draw 2, and it flashes back. I'm sorry. draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. I'm sorry, I forgot I actually added the good one in here. Phase of Looting, Cathartic Reunion is discard 2 cards to draw 3. Tormenting Voice, discard a card to draw 1. Or I'm sorry, discard a card to draw 2. That's another one. Throw a Possibility, again, discard a card to draw 2, but this is at instant speed. And Wild Guess is additional cast to discard 1 card and draw 2. So there are, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I know that since I've made this deck, there have been like 3 more that have been made. But I think this is fine. Leaving it at 5, just being able to draw that many cards. I think that this will allow you to draw. So you can discard 5 cards to draw 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 cards. So I think that's good enough for this deck. I'm sure you can up it if you want, if it doesn't feel like it's playing right. Now the last section I'm going to do is going to be the utility section and defense and all that stuff. I mean, defensively, the whole deck is defensive. But this is where the utility comes in. So I'm going to go with a Planeswalker first. We have Jaya, Venerated Fire Mage. Comes into play with 5 loyalty counters. It's 5 to cast, so that's pretty good right there. It has a static ability of if another red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage plus 1 to that permanent instead. With Torbran, it adds together, so you can actually deal plus 3. Okay, keep that in mind. Then, for -2 loyalty, it deals 2 damage to any target, so it's automatically doing 3 damage just by itself. With Torbran, it'll be 5. So, Rolling Vortex. It's a 2 to cast enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Rolling Vortex deals 1 damage to them. And then whenever you cast a spell, if no mana was spent to cast... whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, we're looking at you, Blue. Rolling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player, and then for red, you can make it so that your opponents can't gain life this turn. There are a lot of free spells that go around in Magic. This is kind of one of those things that punishes them. Valakut Exploration, so it's 3 to cast enchantment. It has landfall, and then whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Remember, you still have to pay the mana cost. At the beginning of your unstep, if there are cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, put them into their owner's graveyard, and then Valakut Exploration deals that much damage to each opponent. So, it has a little bit of way to be utility and deal damage. Leyline of Combustion, 4 to cast. If Leyline of Combustion is in your opening hand, it comes into play for free. Whenever you and/or at least one permanent you control becomes the target of an ability an opponent controls or a spell, Leyline of Combustion deals 2 damage to that player. Again, with Torbran, it's 4. Implement of Combustion, just an artifact that you can sacrifice it to deal damage, and then when it's put into the graveyard, you can draw a card. That's the only reason why it's in here. Mask of Avacyn is to help keep protection on Torbran, gives it hexproof and a little bit of a beefier butt, even though it's already beefy. Heavy Air Blast, it's kind of a choice I made. I should have probably found, I couldn't find another Viridian Longbow. It should be a Viridian Longbow, but it makes it so that this creature deals 2 damage to any target creature or player. The reason why this is in here is because it makes the creature deal it, and the creatures are red in here, so it makes it so that Torbran still goes off. And then by force is a little bit of defense. It's 1 red X, destroy X artifacts, because there are some asshole artifacts out there. So that is pretty much my version of Torbran. My budget version, again, this is available for sale, $40. Let me go over some of the upgrade options that you can do for this deck to make it really shine. So let me zoom in here, and it's been a while since I made a Commander deck video, so I'm going a little longer than normal. Hopefully it's not too long for you. Alright, so in the land section for this, it's mono red, so we're going to go with the easiest way to help you. Valakut in mono red, literally every mountain you play deals 3 damage to something. Now the source is colorless, so it won't help with Torbran, but it's still free damage. War Room helps you draw cards in a monocolored deck because, well, you're a monocolor, so War Room doesn't hurt you. It actually costs less to use it. And then Nykthos, Shrine to the Nyx, because it'll go it adds mana equal to your devotion to a color. You're only in one color, so that'll help. Shivan Gorge is an iffy one I would throw in there just because it deals damage directly. Again, it's colorless source, so it doesn't help with Torbran, but it's free damage. And, you know, you have nothing but mountains in here, so it doesn't hurt. Here's where I would go a little cheeky with them things. So I like scrying sheets in Magic. It helps. It basically says if you look at the top card of your library, and if it's a snow permanent, put it in your hand. So I play that with Snow Cover Mountains, so that you can rotate the cards in your deck, hopefully get some lands into your hand, and use them to discard when you need fuel for doing damage. Prismatic Vista, Fabled Passage, and any of the red fetches will help you thin your deck out of bad draws later on in the game. Detection Tower helps it so that if your opponent's playing stuff that's hexproof or can't be targeted, you can get that out of the way. Mirror Pool helps it so that you can sacrifice it to copy a spell, which you may need to finish the game. And Vesuva goes along with great with some of the additions that I've already pointed out to you. Like a Nykthos or a War Room or a Valakut. You can't do Valakut, sorry, it's a legendary. But I think Nykthos is too. So things like a War Room where you can draw more cards and stuff like that. Lastly, I don't know how I feel about these. I wrote these down, but I'll send them as a suggestion. I wouldn't do them myself. I understand why I put them in here, but it's kind of one of those personal choices. So you got things like Lotus Field, Lotus Veil, and Scorched Ruins, which help you with your X spells. And you want to put some more X spells in here, and these will help them shine. All right. As far as the ramp section goes, I have a trio that I always go with, and then I have a secondary trio that's more expensive. So Soul Ring, Thought Vessel, and Arcane Signet. Now, Soul Ring makes sense in here, and Thought Vessel makes sense if you're drawing a lot of cards. Arcane Signet doesn't normally make sense, but it's a 2 to cast mana rock that helps you accelerate. So that's the only reason why I mentioned that. On the cheaper side, I'm going to go with a Mind Stone, a Felwar Stone, and a Prismatic Lens, because they're all 2 to cast mana rocks to help you accelerate. The other trio that I always talk about is Jeweled Lotus, especially in a monocolor deck. You can get Torbran out first turn. Mana Crypts and Mox Diamond, that's the other trio. That's the expensive trio, I always say. Helps you accelerate, and it kind of makes your deck a little more powerful that way. And lastly, you've got the other stuff like a Chrome Mox or a Mox Amber, because this is, again, a monocolor deck, and you're not worried about you're not worried about it being... I mean, I think Chrome Mox, when it comes into play, you have to exile a non-land something that's colored, so you don't really worry about, like, if you have a shock in your hand, you can exile that or imprint that to make it so the Chrome Mox does red. Mox Amber works as well. And then my last thing I'm gonna say, and I gotta hold on one second. Let me think about this for a second, because I don't know if I want to suggest this yet. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna mention it. I wasn't sure if I was gonna mention it, but I'll mention it. So Pyromancer's Goggles, it's a little expensive to cast. It was just reprinted, so it's a good one. It says to tap to add a red to your mana pool, and then you can copy a spell. The reason why I wasn't sure I wanted to mention it in this section was because it's not really ramp, because it's 5 to cast, but it is in a sense. So I wasn't sure I wanted to put that in a different section. But Pyromancer's Goggles works really well in a deck like this, especially if you pay 1 red with it to shock somebody. You get double shock, and with Torbran out, you get 8 damage out of that. So anyway, so those are a couple of the ramp things that I would add. Some of the creatures I would change out or add in would be something like Toraf, God of Fury, Chandra, Fire of Kaladesh, and that one's a pretty good one because you're casting a lot of red stuff, dealing damage with it, so you can untap it. And her thing to flip over into a planeswalker is pretty easy in a deck like this. Or Inferno Titan, because when it comes into play or attacks, it just keeps dealing damage, so it's pretty good that way. Neheb the Eternal is a good option. Heartless Hidetsugu, who literally just says everybody loses half their life, and then obviously you add 2 to that for everybody with Torbran. Or Sin Prodder is a good option as well. Leyline Tyrant, and there's a card that I'll go over that's going to be added to the options that you should add to this deck if you add a Leyline Tyrant. It basically becomes Omnath, God of Locust of Mana or whatever. Omnath, Locust of Mana, makes it so that you never lose the mana unless you spend it. That's what Leyline Tyrant does. Emberwild Captain helps this deck a lot out as well. And Soulscar Mage is one of those ones that is... It's not helpful in every situation, but if you're going up against somebody that's playing Eldrazi or indestructible stuff, Soulscar Mage can make it so that you can actually kill their creatures, especially the Eldrazi Titans. So, Those are just a couple of the suggestions for the creatures. Not a lot here because this deck is not really a creature-based deck, but those are a couple that can help. As far as the spells go, we're going to start off with some of the damage spells. I said X spells before. One of the most important one would be Comet Storm. Blasphemous Act is a good one to throw in there to help clear the board. Red Sun Zenith, another X spell, and it shuffles in, so you can keep using it over and over again. And again, there are a lot of options when it comes to damage spells in red that I can't name them all, and I can't put them all up here because there's just that many. So just take a look at the MTG Familiar or go to the Gatherer, and you'll find what you like. Some utility spells that you can add are Risk Factor. They're not going to... It helps you draw cards. Trust me, if Torbran's out, they're not going to want to take... I think it's 6 damage they would take if they chose to not, let you draw the cards, and it's going to let you draw 3. That's really nice. And it can be cast a second time, and they're really not going to want to. Jessica's Will is a really good option for that too. And defensively, Vandal Blast is the best artifact removal red has. So those are just a couple of the options. And again, not a lot of options I'm going to give on the upgrades just because there are so many directions you can go with a mono red deck. Enchantments, we're gonna head on to that. There are a lot of doublers. So Dictate of the Twin Gods, Furnace of Wrath, and Fiery Emancipation are must-haves. I don't have any left. I was using Dictate of the Twin Gods for the budget Battle Brew decks as the one foil rare, and now I'm out. So, it sucks, but that's the way it is. You can go with Outpost Siege, Court of Ire, and Blood Moon will really screw some people over, especially since it doesn't do anything to you and does everything to anybody else, because red's not played in Commander. I mean, it's a secondary color, maybe a third color, and most likely a fifth color, but it's not played very often, so Blood Moon really screws with people. Leyline of Punishment makes it so people can't gain the life back. Underworld Breach will help it so you can recast some of the spells you have at the cost of your graveyard, which doesn't really matter. And then Braids of Fire. Braids of Fire with Leyline Tyrant basically means you can have a mana battery to store for all those X spells you want to add. It used to be, it was printed as a card that was supposed to have a drawback when Mana Burn was a thing. Now it's nothing but a benefit at all to red decks, and which makes me curious as to why A, it's not played more, and B, why red's not played more, because you have a free mana battery. So, I mean, and you have a lot of stuff you can do in red with a mana battery, but what do I know? Alright, up next, artifacts. So we're going to go and try to make things a little cheaper with Ruby Medallion. You're going to protect your commander with things like Swiftfoot Boots, or you're going to put out a Pyromancer's Gauntlet, which basically it reads almost the same thing as Torbran, but I think it's actually red instants and sorceries, not just a red source. Endless Atlas will help you with your card draw because you're going to want to draw as much fuel as you can. Red burns out pretty quickly. Primal Amulet helps make all of your instants and sorceries cost less, and Mind's Eye will help you again fuel that hand up so you can keep going. Helm of the Host is great with Torbran because then you've really got a lot of damage going. Isochron Scepter is a good addition here because if you have something that really works for you as far as your instants go, like something that splits damage with Torbran out, it helps. And Shadow Spear helps make it so that your opponent's creatures can be targeted. So, a couple of good ones there. A couple of the Walkers, and I'm not really a big fan of Walkers for this kind of a deck because everything's taking damage, but Chandra Pyro Genius, Chandra Torch of Defiance, and Chandra the Firebrand. Of course, Chandra is going to be in here because it deals with fueling your hand and dealing damage. So, Jaya Ballard, Jessica Thrice Reborn, and Koth the Hammer also could make appearances in a deck like this and help it out. So, just a couple of the options that you can do. As far as the win cons go for this deck, I didn't have any of this, so I want to let you know. Rings of Brightheart and Basalt Monolith are an infinite mana combo. So you pair those two with any X spell, and boom, you pretty much got the game set match. Alright? So that's one of the win cons I would go with. As far as other win cons, play with it. It's mono red, so you're doing a lot of damage, and this is basically spell slinging, so I don't have much more to go on other than that. I mean, there are so many different artifact ways that you can create infinite mana. That's just the one I would go with for this deck, just for the fun of it. So if you want to explore them, I mean, you can definitely send me a message. I'll tell you some of the other ones if you don't know them. I try to give everybody a little infinite mana combo at the beginning of each one of these videos. I may have gone over one, and if I haven't, I can let you know what it is. So, anyway, that's my upgrade guide to the Torbran deck. It's actually not a bad deck. It's pretty quick if you get things going. If you have a good opening hand, it pretty much can be over in, I think, turn 4 if it's done right. So anyway, hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully if it's something you want to play, either you buy this deck or you can build your own with a version of this. It doesn't really matter to me. Again, go to the Facebook page if you want to contact me for anything. It's Bluebears Games on Facebook. I think it's Bluebears Games .online. It's Facebook.Bluebears Games. I'll have it up here so you can see it. You can put a message in the video. There's a comment section below. And then you can email me, bluebearsgames@gmail.com. I'm usually available. I've been really busy this summer. I want to apologize, especially to Joe Lasher out there. Thank you for still contacting me all the time and having conversations, dealing with the fact that I've been super busy. I've got my son for the summer. His room is my studio. So unfortunately, I don't get to get in here as often as I can. I've been building decks left and right because, Ross, thank you for the purchase, but man, you made me really busy for the last couple weeks. He bought 12 of the Battle Brew decks, so I had to remake some and make new decks, and so it's just been a busy summer. I do appreciate all that, and I thank you guys for all that. But again, you can contact me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can possibly do that. I've been trying to catch up, and it's just not happening. So anyway, do me the favor, please like the video. It helps my video analytics. Share it out to anybody who may be interested in a deck like this, or either to build or to purchase. It would be great. And subscribe to the channel if you have not done so yet. There's no reason why you shouldn't. I give as much as I can. All I ask is for a sub, maybe a like or two. Not like I'm asking you for your firstborn. So please go ahead and do that. That's my time for the week. Thank you again for watching. I will see you guys all next week.